Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Championship Lowdown podcast. I am joined here with Chris today. Hello, Chris.
Hello, James. Pleasure to be with you.
And today, so kicking off for our first podcast, we're going to be doing a transfer window roundup so far. Obviously, we're still quite early into the transfer window, obviously in July, so not many teams may have done as much business as others. So don't get offended if we don't talk about your team very long today, but if you've only signed like one player, you're probably not going to get that much of a mention compared to teams who've signed like seven. But we're going to go in alphabetical order. We'll start with Birmingham and we'll end with Wrexham, and we're going to give our thoughts on the team's transfer window so far. So, kicking it off, we've got Birmingham City, obviously the big talking point of this sort of transfer window so far. Spent a lot of money last season in League One and won the league. And they seem to be following suit again this season, Chris, as they've already made a few big signings.
Yeah, they've not really spent, like we've discussed beforehand, they've made about 6 million with the player sales on top. But I think some of their signings that just don't make sense, and they were the same in League One, where they didn't make much sense. Some of them, I think a lot of them were signings for the sake of making signings. Um, the first one I can pull out for this is Demarai Gray. Is just doesn't make sense, especially when you've got Mark Leonard on the squad. So Demarai Gray for me, what it's a good signing to have. You know, he's got 200 games in the Premier League. He's got a handful of Champions League games with Bayer Leverkusen. So he's good to keep around for the experience. But in terms of the players they do have that will need to be nurtured, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't really understand it when I saw the links and then it came through, and I think it's very much based for me off on this bit of a nostalgia thing for them, especially from the fans' perspective. Obviously, I was with them a long time ago, and it's like a comeback story at the end of his career. I'm just looking through it now. Obviously the big name one is Kyogo Furuhashi from Stade Rennes for, well, on transfer market is what we'll be basing off of stats wise. It says about 9 million euros. I think it was about 5 million up front, and then there's some add-ons to come with whatever they do this season. But it's a lot of money. He had a good first half of the season with Celtic. I think he had over about 10 goals in the league in half a season, and then made his 10 million move to Rennes then. But and then didn't really fit in Liga, and I was made the move to the Championship straight off the bat. So we'll see how that goes. Apart from that, they've made some signings. Tommy Doyle on loan, obviously he's a very high caliber footballer. James Beadle's got 2-3 years under his belt of Championship experience in goal. Asai Samuel back in the league after leaving he's joined from Fenerbahce, obviously left QPR a couple of years ago. So it's interesting to see the approach they've gone with so far, but I do agree with you in a sense of some of the signings don't really like. Did you really need them, or have you just bought them for whatever, you just for the sake of it, sort of thing? But again, with Birmingham, they've got enough money to probably be able to afford to just sign players for the sake of signing players at the minute. So wouldn't be entirely surprised. But and no real major outgoings either. Ramel Donovan was already gone more or less, and Yokohama again. So you have to feel they're in an okay spot for the next season. You think?
Yeah, and I think with how the championship looks as well, with some of the teams, they'd probably be your favourites to. They'd probably be one of the first teams you put down next season to go up, especially concluding business like this early. Um, so looking at the rest of the league, they do have an advantage for me. Some of the other signings, yeah, Asai Samuel. It's the reason he was played in Turkey, really. Um, and Doyle, if they get promoted, 10 million. Is it good or bad business per se? Because you're going to be paying more than 10 million for a player in the Premier League. But is he going to be a player you're playing week in, week out in the Premier League? So there's two ways to look at it with Doyle as well.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where they finish up because obviously coming off a League One season, you might not think, oh, they're going to go straight into it, but with the money they throw about, and I don't think they're anywhere near done yet, and I think they need to sign a few more players to be the favourite everyone thinks they are at the minute. But it'll be interesting to see how they get on. But I guess we will soon find out with next season looming ever closer now. But we will move on. Next up, we have Blackburn Rovers, and a bit different on this one. According to this, again, for transfer market, yeah, they've made two signings. Tavares from Moriense for £2 million and Deneve from Kortrijk in Belgium for £750,000. So not a lot of money being spent. And Going out, we've seen Danny Barth and Andy Vyman leave to join Derby. Apart from that, and not really anything too noticeable that's going to make their change. So overall, you'd have to say not much change at Blackburn after what was a fairly decent season last year.
Yeah, and I think they're going to be one of those teams that you just sort of see slip down. Um, letting Jack Vale go for free was a bit of a shock to me. Um, the players coming in are a bit unknown, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. When you look at the teams they've come from, they're just players who probably aren't being watched by others. It doesn't necessarily mean they're bad signings, and I think you'd have to give them at least half a season before you judge whether they're a good or a bad signing. Um, but I don't see Blackburn Rovers having another season like they had last season.
I think obviously losing Eustace was their big. We saw their drop off when Ismail came in. They had that big run of form, which in the end cost them what looked like a nailed on playoff berth to ending up finishing close to mid table. So it'll be intriguing to see how they do this season under Ismail. But so far, again, it's a bit hard to judge. Two signings that are very unknown, so it'll be and no one really leaving. So it'll be interesting to see how they cope next season. But as we said, we won't speak about teams for ages because teams like Blackburn, they haven't really done much, so nothing's too much changed there. But a team who has done a bit more business is next up is Bristol City. Now, probably one of the more active teams, you have to say, in the transfer window so far. 4 signings through the door. Joe Lumley from Southampton, I'm assuming. Hopefully, for their sake, there's a backup goalkeeper option. But obviously, Max O'Leary had his critics last season. Emil Rees from Preston, bit of a staple of the Championship over the last couple of seasons. Hirakawa from Makaidi Zelvia, and then Adam Randall from Plymouth. So 3 very known signings, and then one probably not many people would have heard of beforehand. And going out, we've only really seen a couple of outgoings. Again, nothing major. Probably hit Garda hit when they knew they were going to lose, but again, a team that finished in the playoffs last season, obviously. So, do you think so far they've improved on that side that finished in the top 6, or would you say it's about where it was?
Yeah, I'd say they're about where they were, but they're another team to me. They're one of those teams who I always looked at and said they had the capability of kicking on to promotion. Um, I don't think they stood a chance against Sheffield United. I think that was well, we saw that obviously over 2 legs, but um, they're like Blackburn for me. I don't see them having a repeat really. They are helped by the fact they've made some big money sales in recent years. You know, Scott going to Bournemouth, for instance. Um, but I also think those are the type of players a championship club can't replace.
Yeah,
Um, and they're not the only team in the second division who has that problem. The funny thing I will point out is we say they've done a lot more business than the rest. They haven't spent a penny of their transfer budget yet.
no.
Um, so Emil Rees from Preston is the one that stands out to me the most. Um, certainly needs some goals in the team, and whether he can bring that remains the question. But having someone who's been in the second tier is going to be a boost to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, he's a bit of a weird player. Reese, he had a really good sort of couple of seasons at the beginning, and then recently he's not been probably at the levels that Preston would have wanted. Hence why they've let him leave on a free. Adam Randall again, he looked a solid player. He was linked with Swansea as well earlier in the window, but ended up at Bristol City. Just it seems to just be bulking up that squad a bit, ready for when they do. Hopefully, for their sake, spend their money in the transfer budget that they have the reinforcements in depth. Because obviously in this league, it's all well and good having a good starting 11, but we've seen so many teams falter because of a lack of depth for obviously what is a really tough season to ask for in the Championship. So it'll be intriguing to see when they do spend the money what they do with it. But overall, again, for someone who's probably done the most business out of most teams, still not that busy so far with someone for Bristol City. But next up, we've got Charlton Athletic, a newcomer in the Championship. So you'd like to think money would be spent to try and keep them in the league, but so far it hasn't been spent. Well, it has on players, but we don't know how much for because on here this is just a lot of question marks of undisclosed fees. But we've seen Amari Bell from Luton, Sonny Carey from Blackpool, Thomas Kaminski from Luton, which for me was one of the more standout ones, Isaac Alafe from Stockport, and Mbick from Charlton under 18s. So he's just promoted into the first team. So 4 signings. I'd assume Alafe and Kaminski wouldn't have been cheap, considering they're coming from League One teams, but some solid improvements there on a team that was already quite good last year, you think?
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Kaminsky is the best signing there. You're getting a goalkeeper who was arguably in the team of the season the year Luton were in the Premier League. Um, and Amari Bell is a player am quite I rate quite highly as well. So 2 fantastic signings from the same club there for me. Um, Obviously, Amari Bell's on a free transfer because he's was out of contract at Luton, wasn't he?
I believe so, yes.
But 31, it sort of goes against Charlton's policy for me in a way. I look at a lot of Charlton's players and they have quite a youthful squad in some departments. So it's they've gone backwards with their recruitment a bit there for me, but at the same time, when you have a young squad, you're gonna want a player of that age around just to sort of kick youngsters on, and because you can't expect youngsters to gain experience playing with youngsters, they have to have a senior figure in the team.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. As obviously, you've got to be careful when you move up into this league. You've got to find that balance of obviously keeping the youth going, so you have a lot of players who have room to develop, but then also bringing in people with experience in this league, because at the ultimate day, their goal will be to stay in the division, as it will be with the other teams who've come up as well. As much as other teams like Birmingham may have higher ambitions than Charlton, Charlton's budget isn't going to allow them to dream probably near the playoffs, so they're going to need to just consolidate into the Championship and make sure they don't end up back in the position they were in last season. Obviously, you've got Nathan Jones, who it's a bit like you either love him or you hate him. I think I'm probably leaning on towards one side, but I won't say which on that one. But he's a good manager at the end of the day. He's brought him out of a really tough league to get out of. And with them signing so far, is a Kaminski as well. He's a really good goalkeeper at this level and probably even above. He was fine in the Premier League as well. So they're good signings, I think. And it's just, I think what the goal will be for them is just consolidate. They haven't really lost anyone either, which is a big key when you get promoted. Obviously, there'll be players of interest, but so far they've looked to have kept more or less everyone, bar Thierry Small. I think that's probably maybe someone they didn't want to lose, but they have lost to Preston, unfortunately for them. But again, couldn't really be helped. I believe he was out of contract because he went for free. But apart from that, they've done pretty well to keep the players that, obviously that you think would be a part of their team next season. And I don't know if you agree, but I think they're looking all right so far to be in that position just to consolidate and sit around in this division for a couple of years.
Yeah, and there's certainly a team I'd like to see head back up to the top flight. And I'm glad you mentioned Thierry Small because that was going to be one of the players I pointed out that you're just not going to replace, and that's who Amari Bell's going to come in and try to replace most likely. But replacing a 20-year-old with a 31-year-old is a tall ask in some ways. Um, yes, he's got more years' experience doing the job, but he also doesn't have the same legs that Small would have. So that could be somewhere that teams try and expose. That could be the side of a pitch teams try and expose later on in the season. When a player like Bell is tiring, if he's a regular starter for them, which you would expect him to be probably, because he's been regular in the Championship with Luton and in the Premier League with them as well. But yeah, you were right. Small was a free transfer, and that's a huge player to lose for free.
Absolutely. But next up, we'll move on to Coventry. And another team where there's not entirely much to talk about, apart from, they've got 2 players in, but the big one obviously was Kane Kesler Hayden joining from Aston Villa on a permanent deal, spent multiple seasons on loan in and about the EFL, and now obviously last season was at Preston, but this year will play for Coventry. And as much as he hasn't left yet, you have to imagine Van Ewijk might be on the way out if they're spending £4 million on a right back. And they've signed someone called Brow from Granada. And again, it's another one I'm signing to. Personally, I can't say I know too much about him, But as far as the departures go, Fabio Tavares departed. I can't say that's one they've missed too much. The only player who's left really that was a massive part of the first team last year and only for half of the year was Jamie Patterson. He's joined Plymouth, but I can't imagine that'll be too big of an upset for them. So overall, I think, obviously, as I said, the talking point really here is Kane Kessler-Hayden joining from Villa.
Yeah, bringing in an FA Youth Cup winner as well. So they've solidified on both sides of their defence with their two signings so far. They're not really a team for me who need much work. Um, they're really good going forward, and I think the defence is probably the biggest thing they have to address. So by getting that done early in the window is big for their season. But the very first thing they have to get the nail in the coffin on and not knock out of their game this season is fall into the lower end of the table in the first half of the season, because they seem to do it all the time now. You look one week and they're 19th, and then you look the next week and they're 6th, and it's like, how are you doing this? Um, and I think that was a large part of why Mark Robbins went, because while a lot of people were upset that Robbins did leave Coventry, I think from a perspective of the board, you'd have to look at this and think, yes, he keeps taking us to the playoffs from the relegation zone, from near the relegation zone, but he also keeps taking us near the relegation zone every season. And there's going to come a season where he stops bringing you out of a relegation zone. So I think it made sense to be like, yeah, we can't let that keep happening, and it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with you on that one. I just think obviously it was addressed. He was, there was a lot of fans were upset, but then obviously weren't very quickly when Lampard came in and saw him fly up the table. Had ended up with a bit of heartbreak, you have to say, in the last minute of the playoff semi-final against Sunderland. But as you said, there's a great team there already, and you've got Lampard, who again may divide opinions on whether you think he's a good or a bad manager. But at the end of the day, he's proven that when he has a good squad behind him, at least he will succeed. And as much as they did lose in the playoffs, it was still a successful season compared to where they were when he took over. But yeah, they seem to cut out, as you said, just starting that season poorly and just kick on straight away. Because if they do, they could really be up there. If they can play like they do in the second half of the season, in the first half, they should be near the top of the table. So it'll be interesting to see how much business they actually feel like they need to do. So if Van Ewijk is to leave, which he's rumoured to, obviously you can see Kane Kesselhead is just a perfect, just slide straight into that right back position. They probably won't even notice much of a difference. If not, might even be an improvement. But as I said, they made some signings. Obviously, Matt Grimes from Swansea last year as well brought into that midfield. Radoni, I think, for me, is the big speaking point with Coventry this season. And will he stay or will he go? I've seen a lot of links to him to some big moves into the Premier League or abroad, whatever. But he's a fantastic player. If they can keep hold of him and build that team, just keep building around it, adding in little strength in depth, I think they were going to be a true contender in the Championship next season, as they have been for the past 2 or 3 years now, especially in the playoff places. But we will move on to Derby County, a team that were in big trouble for parts of last season, but got John Eustace in, maybe surprisingly to a lot of people, after he left Blackburn while being in the playoffs. Uh, and so far, not much to speak about. They've signed O'Donnell from Blackburn, Danny Bath, Andy Vyman from Blackburn as well, both of them too. And then I think you're going to mention this quite a lot on your bit, but the main bit for me, Carlton Morris joins from Luton Town. Proven goal scorer in the Championship and even the Premier League, where he had a decent amount of goals for what was a really poor Luton side all season. That's got to be a sign that excites some of their fans.
Yeah, they're another team who show how good they are going forward. So adding a player like Carlton Morris can elevate them. I don't think they're really going to threaten anywhere. I have a feeling they're going to be in the mix in the relegation battle again. But the highest I see them threatening, especially after this sort of early transfer activity, when a few other teams in the division are already getting deals done early, I don't see them threatening above mid-table.
Yeah, I mean, it's just I've seen a lot of people saying they're going to be higher, and they're rumored to sign Patrick Agyemang from Charlton, Charlotte FC in MLS for what seems to be a pretty significant fee, leading towards about £6 to £8 million. Personally, I watch a lot of MLS and I just don't see the worth in him being £8 million. But even if they did sign him, it's just a team that lacks in enormous amounts of quality. They've lost Nat Phillips now, who's gone on. We'll speak about him. He's gone to try another Championship club, but was obviously on loan anyway. Marcus Harness also leaving, Mendes Lang leaving. Not saying these were massive parts, but it's just this depth that you need in the league. I think as much as John Eustace is a brilliant manager, and I can see him at least keeping them out of the drop zone, I don't see them threatening, as you said, much higher than the middle of the table, really, at any point this season, unless they make a lot more business happen in the back end of the season, the transfer window, rather. So, yeah, for me, not an exciting window so far, but also not a poor window. I think you'd probably say the same.
Um, the only negative I point out in their window, while yes, they've only made a handful of signings, the average age of who they have bought in is 33.
Yeah.
And those are not the players who are going to help you push up the table completely. Or one or two, yes, but when you've made four signings and only one of them's under 30 and is actually almost 30 himself, I just don't see how you expect to push up the table with them. Especially when you look at the age of the players who've left. Tyrese Forner leaving, that's a 25-year-old gone. You've got a 23-year-old released. They're not really. Yes, they're not really gonna break into the squad, but it's you can't replace youth with experience all the time. Um, Otherwise, you end up doing something like Fulham did in the Premier League last season, which was release 35-year-old Willian and replace him with 36-year-old Willian a few months later. Um, so I just don't see them being signings that help them push up yet.
Yeah, as you said, I'm all for teams who know they're going to be in a struggling sort of season to sign experienced players to help. Obviously, especially players maybe who've been through that. Obviously, Carlton Morris now knows what it feels like to be relegated for the Championship, so he'll know maybe what needs to be done to help avoid it. But as you said, it's not the signings that get you off your seats, really, of like, wow, we signed a really exciting young player who's going to be at the club and be a massive asset. You signed four players who said the average age was 33, who might help you consolidate for another year before you look to spend big money elsewhere. But as you said, not really too exciting. But it could be worse, as proven by the team we're going to speak about next, which is Hull City. And it's safe to say it's been a bit of a mess in Hull for the last couple of weeks. We've seen an embargo placed on the club over an unpaid transfer fee, reportedly of £1 million to Aston Villa. And the same signing was Louis Barry, who also had a deal fall through to join Hull on a permanent due to a lack of funds. And they've only made one signing, and also only one major signing, which was Poeta from Leverkusen, who they had on loan. But apparently, Chris, that one's also in jeopardy because of the embargoes they've been placed under now for the next three windows.
Um, I do believe it could go through because there was a clause in his loan deal, Gustavo Puerta.
Okay.
So I think that's the workaround of how they get to keep him. Um, so, so yeah, I don't really know what's gone on there. If they can't make any more signings than what they've already got, then they're in trouble again. They barely survived. They've lost some key players. Um, and a player like Louis Barry is a big one to not be able to keep.
Yeah. I mean, their owner released a little statement today, and it was sort of saying that they've appealed the embargo. The debt that was reportedly put them in the embargo has been paid, but it seemed very weird the way it was all worded. And obviously, we've seen so many of these statements from owners that haven't been great in the past that have proven to be incorrect or just a lie. And I wouldn't entirely be surprised if that's the case in this situation. But as you said, losing some big players, João Pedro was a big part of that squad last season, gone. Amrabat is gone. You know, Melem gone. It's just like it seems to be a lot of turnover at that club. Obviously, and then all the loan deals. A lot of their good players were on loan last season. as much as Barry didn't play, as you said, he got injured, but as you said, it's another big player to not be able to keep because we would obviously love to have him next season. Gelhardt from Leeds as well, gone back on loan. Zambrano, I don't know if he's coming back on a permanent, but obviously if they're in an embargo, then he won't. But again, and Finn Burns as well going back to Man City. So it's a lot of turnover for a team that was already struggling. And you have to say, with who they brought in, Ajayi from West Brom, Phillips as a backup goalkeeper, it's not the signings that are going to push you from being a team at the bottom to a team that's going to go compete higher up the table. It seems we're in trouble here. And obviously there was rumours about John Joe Shelby. Don't know if that can still happen because I don't know what the rules are with free agents. Ollie McBurney as well has been linked heavily with Hull, but now reportedly that isn't going to happen. So you have to say, with obviously another manager we're not really sure about, it could be a long season for Hull if this embargo isn't lifted and they cannot sign anyone else.
Yeah, see, weirdly, I can't even find that he's stayed because there was something from May that they'd exercise an option in How Pedro's contract.
Yeah, and apparently that's what I thought. But according to this, he's gone. Where has he gone to?
Yeah, he's
San
gone to St.
Luis.
Louis in Mexico.
So it just seems a massively weird situation.
Again, they're a team who've just lost really young players.
Yeah,
Um, and I think Villa suffer as well through not being able to sell Barry because obviously they're in a bit of uncertainty themselves in some departments. Um, but I wouldn't say they've done too badly with their arrivals so far. You know, you've only got two are over 30, but you've also got a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old. So if you take the players they've had, unfortunately, this is taking the players who've come back from loan into account,
yeah.
but that takes your average age to 25. So they've still got a fairly youthful squad, but their area for improvement was obvious, which was goals, because How Pedro was their top scorer and he scored 6 goals, and that's not who you want leading the line.
It'd be intriguing to see. I think it's just going to depend whether they get that embargo lifted or not, and what they do for the rest of the year. Because I don't know what the rule is on free. Apparently, they could sign free agents, but until someone say they couldn't. So it's going to be interesting to see how their season ends up. But hopefully, for their sake, they can sort their ownership issues out and try and kick on the transfer market maybe towards the back end when it's all sorted. But a team that won't really have to worry about financial issues as far as straight away is Ipswich because they haven't spent a penny yet. But I think, as we said, the only signing they've made is David Button from, Reading. Also was at West Brom. And apart from that, their big news for me really is Liam Delap has gone to Chelsea for 35 million, but that is the only player they've lost for a fee. So at the minute, if you take that Ipswich score from last season, you have to think they're probably the favourites to be in that title race. But you have to bear in mind they may not stay.
Yeah, I mean, when they've got 35 million to spend and they're not spending it, they've just had Premier League money. You've had the big bonus of having gone up, but again, they spent heavily in the Premier League. Was a big thing. Um, they've not lost too much of their squad. Axel Tanzerbi is the bigger loss for me, biggest loss for me outside of Dilap. Um, but I could honestly say, I think for the sake of players like Calvin Phillips, his career could be helped massively by just dropping down to the Championship with them. Um, I spoke to a Leeds fan today who said he'd love to see Calvin Phillips back, but City just want ridiculous money. So it's obviously not going to happen. Calvin Phillips' career will probably fully die at Manchester City. Not that his Ipswich loan spell helped. But yeah, I absolutely baffled by the signing of a 36-year-old League One goalkeeper.
Yeah.
Especially when you've just dropped down from the Premier League. Well, what does he bring to your club?
No idea, and I think we probably won't ever see him play for it. I'd be very surprised if he puts an Ipswich shirt on as a starter for the whole season. But yeah, as you said, Delap to Enzebin, as well as the Swansea family signed Cameron Burgess from Ipswich as well, which they didn't seem all too pleased about. But apart from that, not much to speak about at Ipswich. So we'll move on to another team in a bit of financial distress, Leicester, who have actually made no signings so far because they have a 12-point deduction looming over their heads. But they also haven't really got rid of anyone major, as their only departures have been Iverson and Ward, two keepers leaving to Preston and Wrexham, and obviously Jamie Vardy left at the end of his contract. But apart from that, there's not very much to say about Leicester, is there? Just apart from they need to pray they don't get that 12-point deduction.
No, I mean they're going to massively struggle either way without Jamie Vardy, and that's crazy to say after what we just spoke about 36-year-old David Button. To be fair,
Yeah.
but Vardy was just one of those who could still do it. He could have easily gone on for another 5 years, I think. Whether they see my family's from Leicester, so um, they would have been my pick to go straight back up, and they've always been a yo-yo club. Whether they are now, I just don't know. I still, just going down all the Championship transfers, I still put Birmingham City top of my list at the moment. Vardy, like I said, Vardy will be the struggle to replace, and then the only ins of just their loan players coming back, but they're not really a squad that needs too much improvement either. They don't really need to look at improving until they're back in the Premier League, and they need to get that right next time they get back to the Premier League if they can get back there. Chowdhury and Suter are two fantastic players for me, who I'm surprised they let go out on loan last season because they could have easily played every week in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to see how. I think that their whole season's going to depend on whether they get 12 points taken off of them, because you have to think, especially for a title or automatic promotion spot, that's probably not recoverable. Obviously, playoffs, it could easily be done, but it'll be intriguing to see how they cope with whatever financial sanctions that they get placed upon them. And obviously, you have to assume they have to sell a couple of players to meet whatever issues they've got going on financially, because they've been a club that's been in trouble with these issues for a number of years now. But it seems to be they're finally going to hit the repercussions of what they've been doing. But as you said, Jamie Vardy, as much as he is, I believe he's 36 now, is still someone who could have scored probably 10, 15 goals next season in the Championship quite easily. And to lose that and not really have a replacement, it'll be interesting to see how they cope next season. But another club we'll move on to next is Middlesbrough, who, apart from their loan players coming back, also haven't made any signings so far, according to this. Again, I'm not entirely sure if this is 100% accurate and up to date, but according to this, they have actually signed nobody. And their big departure was, for me, it is a mystery how he's gone for this much money. But Josh Coburn for around €6 million, so we're talking about £5 million, for a striker who's not really done all too much in his career, especially not at Middlesbrough, and wasn't setting the world alight at Millwall. But as I said, for me, the big losses to Middlesbrough, seem to be the players they've lost going back to their parent clubs on loan, such as Ben Doak, Illing Jr., Kelechi Iheanacho, and Ryan Giles. They're pretty big players to lose going into next season, you have to feel.
Yeah, I mean, a return of 15 in 66, it's nothing set in the world alight, but he's 22. That's for large part for the price tag. I think age comes into price tag massively. Um, so he's still got years ahead of him, and just don't see Millwall being improved by him at the same time. But I have other opinions on Millwall, which I'll get to really. um, but yeah, they're another team like Blackburn. They've obviously lost Carrick now. They got rid of Carrick. Um, so I don't see them repeating what they've been doing without him. And they've lost too much of their squad.
Yeah, it's another one of them clubs where not too much has happened, so there's not really much to speak about. But so, with that bearing in mind, I'll let you have your opinions, because next up we do have Millwall. And I'm just going to let you start on this one. He said you've got some opinions on this, so I'll let you go first. We're discussing through their business so far.
Yeah, I mean, the bigger talking points are the players who've gone out. Um, George Saville left to Luton on a free. I think at 32, you probably could have kept him around for a bit of experience in your team. Um, Fleming is the biggest departure to Burnley. Um, I just don't. Another player where I just don't see them replacing him, and they've had this problem over before. So Millwall are a team that I think will drop into the bottom half of the table next season with their departures.
Yeah, as you said, it's not. As I said, Fleming went for what you'd assume is a substantial fee. On here, it's about €8 million, but it sounds about right. So they're currently in the profit for albeit what they spent on that big signing of Josh Coburn, which will be probably their biggest signing this summer as far as money spent. But apart from that, no one else really come in. Crocombe from Burton, I can't imagine you'll be a starting goalkeeper for them. But as you said, a lot of players out, and it's interesting to see how they're going to replace them because you'd have to imagine. I believe they finished eighth or ninth last season. It was a good season for them. They were right in the mix until I think it was the last game where they lost out on the final day. But it's a good team. I think it's interesting just to see how they're up there in the first place because on paper it doesn't look that great. But as I said, I kind of agree with you. I think I can see them slipping down because I think there's so much quality being built from teams that finished below them last season or teams coming down that I think it's just going to shift them slightly further down the pecking order. But I still think they'll be all right next season. But I think there's definitely some improvements that need to do to replace some keepers. And Duncan Watmore as well, leaving on a free. Surprised he's not picked up a club. I'm not sure if he has, but according to this, he says without club, so I'm just going to go off that. But Honeyman as well leaving. Just little key parts of their squad that could just benefit them in places. I think they've lost them, and it's going to be difficult. But we'll soon find out how they cope without them. Next up is I'm not sure if I'm 100% correct, but I think they're up there as one of the teams who spent the most money in the league so far this season is Norwich, and that got improved by was it today or yesterday, where they signed Kvitchgarden from Bromby, who's a striker for €8 million. Apart from that, they've made Jacob Wright a permanent after his loan spell last season. Kovacevic from Sporting, Medic from Ajax, Harry Darlin from Swansea, and apart from that, Daniel Grimshaw also joined on a thing. But obviously, the big talking points, I suppose you'll get into this as well, is that Will Borges Saint and Josh Sargent still be Norwich players by the time this window comes to a close?
Yeah, I mean, Borja Signs could be his Norwich career could be over by the time this recording goes out. Really,
Yeah.
um, I'm not really surprised to see him head to a Champions League club abroad if the reports that he's agreed with Porto are true. Um, I think we've seen it before with in the Championship, obviously with Gyökeres. I'm not saying he's going to go to the same heights as Gyökeres, but I think the maddest thing was that he went a number of months without scoring and remained the Championship top scorer last season. Did he not?
I don't know if he got beaten out by Perot towards the end, but I don't think any of them broke 20 goals. So because he scored like basically all of his goals before January, and then just wasn't that great towards the back end, and he was injured as well, I think. But yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, so they're going to get most of their transfers spent back. Um, there's three goalkeepers in as well, which confuses me a bit.
Yeah.
The Sporting keeper Daniel Grimshaw, and then Louis Molden from Palace under 21s. I think someone probably needs to tell Norwich that it's not Pokemon. Um, but they've lost two goalkeepers as well. They've let Angus Gunn and Archie Mayer go. So they were a club who worried me when Jonathan Rowe left. Again, I don't think they're going to threaten anywhere. I'd like to say they could kick on, and if they spend the Borja signs money right, they could. They've already got a striker through the door, and a young striker at that, and we know how well a signing from Man City's academy worked for you lately. So I could be proven wrong. They might still be a playoff team next season. I'd like to say they're a playoff team. I don't think they're automatics though.
Yeah, I think you're about right with that. As I said, Harry Darling from Swansea perspective, he's a good player. I don't think he sets the world alight in the Championship, but he's a solid enough centre back option to have in this league, and he's left footed as well, which is rare. Jacob Bright for me was another one to sort of, obviously had a great loan spell with them, and he made the permanent move, and it's only 2.7 million, so it's a fairly low risk deal we're talking about here. The only loss I think for them from this season was Callum Doyle going back to City after his loan spell. I think he was a pretty good, big part of that team in the second half of the season, and they'll miss him. I think they will struggle without him, but they've made improvements. As then the striker from Bromby, we're just going to have to wait and see what he's like. He's got a pretty good record out there, and I've seen a lot of sort of scouts, whatever, say that they were really impressed by him in Sweden, and we've seen a lot of players come over from that league and do really well. So it'll be intriguing to see how he does. But overall, I think you'll be about right. They'll be, as they always are, sort of in that playoff battle. Whether they get in or not, I don't know, because I think there's a lot of talented teams in this league next season. But it'll be intriguing to see how Norwich get on with their rest of this some window as well. With Sargent, you feel like might be out the door as well if they're spending £8 million on a striker. So it'll be intriguing to see whether he stays or whether he joins Saints in likely leaving the club. Next up, we've got Oxford United, who at the time of record, again, all this is accurate at the time we recorded this, which is, I believe, the 8th of July. They've only made one signing so far, and it is Dekirjmaker from Heracles. I believe he was linked with Blackburn for a fair amount of time until a picture surfaced of him in an Oxford shirt on the timeline, which is a bit of a shock to everyone. But they did get that signing done. But apart from that, nothing else. And on the outgoing things, Ruben Rodriguez to me is the one that sticks out. He's gone to AC Vitoria. Also lost Il Mazzuni to Leyton Orient, but not a massive part of that squad. So overall, pretty quiet from Oxford so far after what was a successful first season in the Championship.
Yeah, don't. Whether they can replicate it, I don't know. I think they're one of my teams again who would be down there. Um, my nailed on picks to go down are already there, I think, as well. And it's mostly the clubs who are in trouble. But obviously, we've seen how clubs can play out of that. But Oxford, they're not really a team who are going to spend much. Which is a surprise that some of the players that have left have left. Um, Probably more shocked by El Mazzuni than Ruben Rodriguez, personally. Um, Rodriguez, after setting the world alight a bit at Notts County, he just didn't really do it at Oxford. Remember him getting sent off against Cheltenham, actually. That's about the only Ruben Rodriguez Oxford United memory I have, was seeing him sent off at Cheltenham Town.
Glowing reviews then.
But yeah, unless business picks up, they're in trouble.
Pretty straightforward one, yeah, I agree. Just there's something needs to change. You need to add some players. Although I think like Dekirjmaker actually was quite a substantial fee for a club like Oxford. So it'll be intriguing to see how good he actually turns out to be with the money they reportedly spent on him. But they definitely need some more players for the door if they're going to be out of that trouble zone. Because again, you've got to imagine it's going to be a club who's been going to be scraping around the bottom until the back end of the season, where they either pull away from it or they fall into it deeper and they get relegated. So it'll be intriguing to see how they get on. But another team who was sort of doing that last season was Portsmouth, and like Oxford, have only made one signing, and it's a player from Sydney FC, Segicic, I can't say I know too much about. On the outgoing side of things, you can't say there's too many people who were massively important. Obviously, you've got some little squad players in there like Yengi and Saidi, Towler, etc. All leave. I believe Towler was recently left to Lincoln either today or yesterday. But again, just another team where at the bottom last season, and so far, obviously we're early in July, but not much to talk about at Portsmouth.
No, I spoke to a Portsmouth fan today as well, funny enough, and he was shocked at just how little game time Riley Towler was getting at the club, especially when the decision to bring Marlon Pack into centre back was made.
Yeah,
So, really good pickup from a Lincoln perspective, I think. Solid experienced centre back with some championship experience but another mid-table team for me, I think. Um, Sort of low mid-table, maybe about 16th.
yeah. As I said, it's just unfortunately for some of these teams, there just isn't entirely much to speak about because they haven't done anything or done anything of massive note. And Portsmouth, unfortunately, fall into that category. So hopefully, when we come back to this in a couple of weeks' time, there'll be more movement at some of these clubs and there'll be more to speak about. But as of right now, obviously, we're still quite early and not a lot has happened at Portsmouth. So it'll be intriguing to see. Hopefully, for their sake, they'll be a bit busier in the back end of the transfer window. But a team that's seemingly been relatively busy is Preston. Some good signings in here, I think. Thierry Small, we touched on about the Charlton departure, but he's a great pickup, I think, for them. Obviously, they've lost Kesler Hayden on loan, and he's now gone elsewhere. You got Valentine for Sheffield Wednesday. Iverson rejoins after a loan spell, I believe, was it the season before. Obviously, with the loss of Freddie Woodman, they needed a goalkeeper, and they brought back a guy who they know is reliable and will work for them. Daniel Jebison, which has always been an intriguing signing for teams at this level, as he's not really ever set the world alight at this level. And then Offia from Brighton, which is their only fee paid according to this. And then on the outgoings, we've seen Emma Reese leave for Bristol City. Freddie Woodman somehow has gone to Liverpool, which is a bit of a weird one. And apart from that, just a few loan dispatches, and Ryan Ledson also left to join Huddersfield. So quite a busy team for the first time in a couple of teams, Chris. We've actually got someone who's done a decent amount of business on both sides of in and out.
Yeah, I'd say they're pushing playoffs for me this season, but we brought in Daniel Jebinson, who just seems to be the EFL's Alvaro Morata. Um,
It's a great analogy, actually.
like I said with Charlton earlier, Thierry Small is a fantastic pickup. Just don't see where they can improve much with a budget. They've got a fairly modest budget to compared to the rest of the championship, and I'll give a club like Preston their due to have survived in the championship as long as they've had, and have sort of solidified themselves in the championship the way that they have as well in recent years is very impressive. But for me, it's all about making signings like this and having a start to the transfer window like this to sort of kick on, because I've always said the championship is a black hole. If you're in there too long, you run the risk of being there forever. And the problem with that is I think there's a lot of clubs in the championship who would be perfectly happy with staying in the championship forever. Because we see what happens to the teams who go up to the Premier League who have a bit of a fairy tale season in the championship. Luton and Ipswich have done it, and then we've seen what's happened to them in the Premier League. And I mean, I'll say as well, I don't think they give it a bad go in the Premier League either.
No,
But I think Preston are one of those teams who just be in the championship forever.
yeah, we know that running joke with them and Bristol City being 12th and 13th, or 11th and 12th every season, which Bristol City had to ruin last season. But yeah, I can sort of see your point. But we'll move on to what could be labelled the team with the best potential signing so far this season, QPR. And the signing I'm referring to, obviously, is Kwame Poku, who joins from Peterborough for, I think it's about £900,000 in compensation, but obviously on a free transfer. They've also got Mbeng from Reading, and I believe Karamoko Dembele has now made his move permanent to QPR as well. And then Adamson from MacArthur. I'm not saying I have to switch that one, but said ignoring everything with this QPR window, apart from obviously, I think in fact you're going to focus on here is Kwame Poku is potentially one of the best signs we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is helped by the fact that they've not really got in for anything other than the compensation which the EFL require them to pay. Um, I think if they had Cifuentes, they'd be one of my favourites to get promoted. But by the fact that Cifuentes is gone, that's what concerns me. Because when he first burst onto the scene with QPR and he helped them stay up, he was my pick for manager of the season. Um, and I think if you're QPR, for one person I'd be looking at is poaching Danny Roll from Sheffield Wednesday with their current situation.
Well, they've actually got their new manager in,
Oh, have
funnily
they?
enough. Julian Stefan, who I was about to speak about, he had a very successful first season at Strasbourg. He got them into sixth in Liga, but the season after, I believe he was either sacked or left in January because they were teetering bottom that relegation zone. Apart from that, he spent the rest of his career with Rennes. Uh, it's a weird one. He said he had that great season at Strasbourg, but also some pretty poor seasons at Rennes. So it'll be intriguing to see how that one goes for them. But yeah, you would have think they would have gone a bit more of a reliable route. But as I said, I think it's one of them teams who've done good enough business and it's all going to stand on whether this manager is going to get the best out of the players or they're not going to do very well. So I guess we'll soon find out how that one goes with Julian Stefan and QPR. But Kwame Poku, as I said, has been one of the best wingers in the EFL potentially, especially last season. But some injury concerns there. But if he's fit, you've got one of the better players in the EFL, I think, on your books for a very very low risk fee. So it'd be intriguing to see how they get on next season. With a few people saying they're going to be pushing up the league, which I wouldn't be surprised. Next up, one of the teams who could say bottled it last year in terms of promotion, Sheffield United, were in a good position and then unfortunately couldn't quite get over the line. They've made a couple of signings. Ukaki from Botev Plodiv. I can't say much about him. One player I can say much about is Tyler Binden. I think it's a great bit of business on loan. Has been a very, very good defender for Reading in the last couple of seasons, and that'll be a good one. But the only departures have been Vinny Souza has joined Wolfsburg for about 15 million, and Rian Brewster has left at the end of his contract, and obviously a lot of loan players going back to parent clubs, and only one coming in, Ivo Gerbic. Not too much about him either, but again, not much to say about Sheffield United, especially not in terms of the ins.
The biggest talking point of Sheffield United's transfer window has been Vinny Souza saying farewell to the wrong club.
Oh yeah, he added Sheffield Wednesday, didn't he, in his tweet?
Um,
I think he did follow it up, in all fairness, with a reminder who the biggest club in Sheffield is, with a picture of Sheffield Wednesday players crying. So I think he made up for it in the end. But yeah, interesting one, that one.
yeah, I mean, some of their players that they've had on loan, they probably could get back on loan next season. Alfie Gilchrist being one, I think. Raksaki for me is a fantastic player to watch, and he probably won't be back on loan anywhere. I think he should be getting ready to break into the Palace first team. Um, but yeah, they're probably going to win the title again. They're probably with Leeds and Burnley gone. They're probably going to win the league.
I think we see a lot of teams who have that extra year in the Championship as well. Tend, as Leeds proved this year, were very successful, having built on a season of missing out rather than going straight up and straight back down again. It seems to work better for certain clubs. So it'll be intriguing to see whether they can follow the pattern of Leeds and win the league again next season. But there'll certainly be competition from the teams who have come down. One team who won't be winning the league next season is Sheffield Wednesday. And if you want to talk about a financial mess, I think this is where you start because we have players handing in their notice because they haven't been paid. Staff haven't been. No one's been paid, bar the players Transeri dealt were thought were value of assets like Gassama, who has been paid, so they can afford to sell him to make money to pay everyone else. So by that obvious logic, no one's come into the club, and a lot of players have left. And I got a feeling that the pattern of players leaving is going to continue for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean this is a one club where you don't really add to a transfer roundup really,
No,
because they can't make any. I think we've seen a mess coming with Sheffield Wednesday for a long time, and it pains me to say it. I think they're going to be the next Reading.
yeah,
the fact that Danny Roll has stuck it out so long is a testament to his character. Especially with some comments that have been made publicly in the past by the owner. So, yeah, it's just really not a lot to say other than you hope it picks up.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we'll try and rattle through some of these because otherwise you'll be here all day. But Southampton, one signing in, Kwashi from Hoffenheim. A few signings out, obviously as you expect from a team that's just been relegated. Sulemana's gone to Atlanta, Amoamu to Strasbourg, and Onachu to Trabzonspor. And Walker Peters has also run out of contract, I believe, and Adam Lallana retired. Uh, but I said ins, not much to speak about. Kwashi from Hoffenheim, you'd think just it should just be a season of can they get straight back up? And with Will Still now at the wheel, you have a feeling they're going to be definitely one of the favourites to be pushing at the top half of that table.
Yeah, it'll be them and Sheffield United for the league title this season. I think they'll be the two automatics. I think it's neck and neck for who wins it.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's going to be a tight race with some of them teams. But as I said, Southampton probably will be. You'll see a lot more activity from Southampton, especially on the inside of the transfer market towards the end of the window, as they haven't done much yet. Stoke have made a couple of signings. You've got Talarov from Plymouth. Sorry, Talavero, from Plymouth. You've got Sorba Thomas, which was quite a big one from Huddersfield, and Divin Mabama from Man City's academy. Obviously, also had some first team experience at the West Ham, but made the move to Man City. He's joined on loan. And then on the outside of the ball, quite a lot of players leaving. Ash Phillips isn't obviously was on loan, was always going to leave, but it's still quite a big loss. There was Ender Stevens, Lyndon Gooch, Niall Ennis, just some squad players really. Nothing too dangerous for Stoke, but some pretty solid signing so far for a team that probably need it after was a season to probably forget last year.
Yeah, they were a team who last season I said would push up the table with the transfer window they had last summer. How things go the way they do in football sometimes is a mystery. They've certainly got a lot of potential in their team. I don't think they're another team that not a lot of work is needed on, but I think goals are the biggest problem, and it seems whenever they bring a striker in, they can't get the goals that they're hoping for.
Yeah, it'd be intriguing to see if they. Well, I mean, on Mabama, I assume is their hope to fix that solution on loan from City, but not too much experience there, so we'll have to see how that one goes for him. Uh, Next up, we have my Swansea City, who, for once, I've actually got optimism with the season because we've actually started the transfer window really well, which is not a pattern that we've tended to follow in recent years. But Zidane Nusa from Hacken, Cameron Burgess from Ipswich is one I was massively happy about. But obviously, the big one that's been spoken about, which only got completed about 2 days ago, was Ethan Galbraith from Leighton Orient. Obviously, comes really highly rated. I don't think I've ever seen a fan base so upset at a player leaving, especially to come to us, as Orient fans were with Galbraith joining Swansea. On the outside of the thing, which is what impressed me a lot, was we got a lot of dead weight off the wage bill. Mikola Kukurevic, just a disaster signing. He's gone. We've lost Joe Allen and Carl Norton. Obviously, Allen retired. Norton has left. I don't know whether he'll play again. But then Cyrus Christie, John McLaughlin, Christian Pedersen was another one on a ridiculous amount of money, and he's gone. So for me, we've actually got Melka Vidal, who we signed in January, but has finally joined up with the squad as we loan him back. So for me, I'm really happy. I think we'll be pushing definitely the higher end of the table this year, and we're definitely in win now mode with some of these signings. But I say, obviously, from an unbiased perspective, I suppose you can provide a bit more of one of them on Swansea.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to give credit to the running joke you seem to create of a Welsh club signing a player called Bobby Wales.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, Galbraith is really highly rated and would certainly help you kick on. Burgess on a free is a really good pickup for me. It's certainly called into question Ricardo Santos, but can't discredit his leadership skills at Bolton either.
I think.
Um,
Yeah, Santos just seems to me one that's just going to fill a gap for a backup centre half for the whole season, with Cabango and Burgess probably being our main two.
I could certainly see you pushing the playoffs this season. Um, you're one of the teams in the semi-finals for me.
I'm glad you've said it, so I don't seem horrendously biased. But
But yeah, really good work to get the players you've got off, really, as well. 36-year-old Kyle Norton, 37-year-old McLaughlin. It's just those type of players who you wonder why they're still in contract at the club, but then also at that age you can't sell them on either. So
honestly, if I wish I had the answer to your question, but me and a lot of our fans were asking that question for a fair while with some of them players as to why they were still there. But they're gone now, so thank God. Moving on to Watford, one of the last couple of teams we have to speak about. Quite active, you have to say, in a way. Hector Cipriano is, for me, the probable standout one. They've also got Mark Boller, Nathan Baxter, and Semedo from Udinese, which, again, it's not entirely surprising seeing someone from Udinese come over with the whole inter-ownership with the Pozzo family. Quite a few, a couple of outs. You've lost Sierra Alta, Ogbonna, and then Roberts. I don't know what's going on with him. But apart from that, again, Cipriani, the focal point of what's been a fairly quiet window for Watford so far.
yeah, again, similar to Poku, fantastic business on a free. Nathan Baxter also stands out a little bit to me on a free from Bolton. But signing a top flight player like Semedo at 20 as well from Udinese is really good business, and it shows how important it is to have these sort of partnerships in a way.
Yep, absolutely. And we've got two teams left, and unfortunately for the video's perspective, there's not two teams that have done an awful lot, but West Brom, although be it have only signed two players, they've spent a lot of money on said two players, with Hegerby coming from Brann for €5.5 million and Nat Phillips from Liverpool for about €3.5 million. On the outside of the thing, Grady Diangana is without a team now. John Swift as well, staple man in the EFL for a long time. He's without a club at the minute. I believe he played in the PFA sort of free agents game they do every year the other day. Ajayi joining Hull as well, and Mason Holgate going back to Everton. So overall quiet, but some pretty shrewd two pickups there in Hegerby and Nat Phillips for West Brom.
Yeah, and West Brom are one of those clubs as well where you're surprised they're spending big because they've been in that position of teetering on the edge with financial issues in the past in the Championship. So to see them spend over 10 million on two players when, well, not over 10 million, nearly 10 million, sorry, on two players, um, is a bit of a shock that they'd run that risk. So I think they're gambling on a playoff push next year. Um, Whether they have the squad to do it, I don't know. And Diangana, we've mentioned, might not be without a club for long. Could be playing European football next year because Rangers want him, apparently.
That'll be an intriguing one, won't it? I think for me the big part of their summer was Ryan Mason becoming the manager. I was when Swansea were in and out of looking for a manager, I was really highly recommended we'd have a look at him. And it's been a long time coming. I think he got a first team job outside of Tottenham. They've clinged on to him for so long for a reason. Obviously, a fantastic coach, and let's just hope for their sake it translates to being a fantastic manager as well. Because I know so many players who have credited Mason with their advancement of their career at Spurs being down to his sort of leadership skills within that coaching staff with Andrew, what would have been Thomas Frank, moving forward. And finally, the newcomers on the block, the team who have broke history last season with back-to-back-to-back promotions from the National League all the way to the Championship. We have Wrexham, who, again, quite quiet. Ryan Hardy joins from Plymouth for about £800,000. Obviously, a team in dire need of forward help, with Sam Smith being the only consistent goal scorer in that team. So it's nice to see they brought over someone who has a record of scoring a decent amount of goals in the Championship for Plymouth. Because obviously, you can't rely on people like Jay Rodriguez, Steve Fletcher, who is now gone. But Jay Rodriguez is quite getting on the older side of things now. And, you've still got like Ollie Palmer, Paul Mullins gone to Wigan, who was their Disney star for the years in the lower leagues, but now moved on. Danny Ward joins from Leicester. The Wrexham boy makes the move back to his boyhood club. But apart from that, a lot of outgoings, especially a lot of players just ending their contracts. Mark Howard, Jake Davis as well. But again, another team who probably needs to do quite a fair bit more, Chris, if they want to be at least competing or, more importantly, staying in the division next season.
Yeah, I mean, we know everyone's we know everyone's looking at that and getting overexcited now and thinking they're going to reach for Premier League, but they're going to be in for a massive shock this summer. Well, this season, I should say. But if they have a summer like this as well, they're in for a huge shock
Yeah,
because they struggle to keep up with Birmingham in League One. Birmingham now seem to be accelerating 1,000 times faster than them, which, yeah, they did have the advantage on them anyway, but there's a lot more teams to worry about in the Championship for Wrexham than there is in League One. Um, so they're in for a huge shock, and I don't see them spending big because we know the stories of how the promotion wage rises have apparently killed them.
yeah.
So I don't see them spending much if that's true. I don't see them linked with anyone very often either. You used to see in League One, you used to see every name in the book thrown at Wrexham, and now it's not really happening. Now they're in the Championship, and I think that's because people know they're struggling a bit.
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the time when they were sort of climbing the leagues, the Ryan Reynolds and Rob Acklin are only rich enough to take you so far. I think they're going to need a lot more outside help now. Especially now they're in the Championship. They saw they had to bring in. I can't remember what the names are for the life of me, but I know they had external investment in League One last season, who they've sold part of the club to, who are very, very wealthy people. I can't remember. Someone in the comments, whatever, could tell me what they're called. I cannot remember for the life of me. But yeah, I just think the Hollywood story might just falter on a bit now, and I think they'll be closer to the bottom of the table than they will be the top next season because this window isn't really impressing anyone, and their team on paper doesn't put much fear into many teams of the Championship. If we're being real, just too many aging players who have been good at this level maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but obviously great in League One, but not as they're better players being like Ollie Rathbone, who wasn't exactly setting the world alight at Rotherham, or George Dobson, same thing at Charlton. So it'll be intriguing to see how Wrexham do, but overall, you have to feel it'll be a season more of. They said it last year they might consolidate in League One, but I think definitely this season they're going to want to consolidate in the Championship before they look to spend a lot of money. Because obviously, I know Rob and Ryan like to go 100 miles an hour, but they're not going to be able to do that in the Championship without probably bankrupting themselves. So it'll be intriguing to see. But that is all the teams that we have so far. So that's all the business that these teams have done at the time of recording. Obviously, in the next hour, someone could sign someone, and then their whole window changes, and what we've said is irrelevant. But that's the whole point. But obviously, we'll come back and look at this at a later date. But if you are interested in joining the podcast, obviously, we're looking for people to come on and speak about these things. As obviously, we'd like to have more than two of us on in certain weeks. But if you are interested in joining the podcast, then DM at Samuel LOFC97, or me and Chris. I'm sure our socials will be somewhere. But just message some of us, get in touch to join the team, and we'd love to have you on to see your opinion. But apart from that, thank you very much to Chris for joining me this week, and we'll hopefully see you all soon for another video.